When upon life's billows you are tempest-tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. Are you ever burdened with the load of care? Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? Count your many blessings, every doubt will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. When you look to others with their lands and gold, think that Christ has promised you his wealth untold. Count your many blessings, money cannot buy your reward in heaven nor your home on high. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend, help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done.
Blue skies and rainbows and sunbeams from heaven are what I can see. When my Lord is living in me, I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. Tall mountains, green valleys, the beauty that surrounds me, all makes me aware of the one who made it all. I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. Green grass and flowers, the blooming in springtime, all works of the Master I live for each day. I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus, for it is the power that saves us today. I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that
humbly I bow. Have thine own way, Lord, have thine own way. Hold o'er my being absolute sway. Fill with thy spirit till all shall see Christ only always living in me.
If the skies above you are gray, you are feeling so blue. If your cares and burdens seem great all the whole day through, there's a silver lining that shines in the heavenly land. Look by faith and see it, my friend. Trust in His promises, friend. Sing and
be happy,
press on to the goal. Trust in Him who leads you. He will keep your soul. Let hope be faithful. Look to Him and pray. Lift your voice and praise Him in song. Sing and be happy today. Often we are troubled and tired, sick with sorrow and pain. There are others living in sin.
Welcome to Bible class this morning. The starting quarterback went down in the third quarter, and he's out. So this morning you have the backup quarterback who doesn't get as many reps as he has gotten lately, but we'll try to at least advance the ball down the field, and hopefully we'll score a touchdown. How's that? Am I getting ready for the Super Bowl or what? Right? Okay. No, Johnathan is home ill today, and he called me this morning at 8:30 and said, "Dad, would you cover?" No, he didn't. He gave me a little bit longer than that. He called me at 8 this morning. No, no, but he said, "Would you cover for me?" I said, "Son, I'd be glad to. I will try to do as good a job as you have done." So we're continuing the study of apologetics, which, as we know, the original term, when we're talking the legal term of an apology, is not like I'm sorry. An apology is a defense. It's a rationale for why you believe a certain thing, and so the whole idea of apologetics talks about what's the rationale, what's the reason for what we do, and how we do it. So today we're going to be looking at some of the kind of some questions from different themes, if you want to look at it that way, on what's going on, and some of the questions that people hear is, how can we believe in God? And I would imagine, I'm not going to put any money on it or ask for a show of hands, but I would imagine that those of you who are here this morning and maybe listening who are believers in Jesus Christ and have faith in God through the power of the Holy Spirit has at least one time in your life doubted whether or not what I'm doing is really what I need to be doing or what I should be doing or what I think I want to do. I think all relationships go through some ups and downs, and it doesn't mean that they are, significant ups and downs and variances, but they are going to be seasons when you feel closer in that relationship and maybe seasons when you feel a little bit more distant. And sometimes during those distant times, we may kind of wonder and question even the existence of God. And that's not uncommon. When you go back and read through some of the Psalms, David's, not all of his Psalms are glory to God, I love you, you're great God, and everything just wonderful and amazing. There are some times when he wonders, he doubts, even Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why do I feel so distant from you? So it's not an uncommon dynamic to kind of go through periods of doubts. What's interesting is some people go through a period of doubt and then they get stuck in that. And that's kind of what's this? How can you continue to believe in God when I did at one time? One of the theologians that I enjoyed reading because he's a great scholar grew up as a Christian. His father was a, not of this faith perspective, but a Christian that his father was a preacher, and he grew up and was very fervent, did all the youth group activities, went to university, a Christian university, and somewhere along that line, he became a Bible scholar. And that Bible scholarship took him into a domain of saying, you know, I think I'm more of an agnostic. I'm not an atheist, and I'm more of an agnostic in my faith. And I doubt the existence of God because it's difficult to prove the existence of God. Well, this series is not going to, you know, I think really be the thing that is going to tip you over into saying, oh, I do believe in God. If nothing else, just let it be some things for you to think about and how you kind of ponder what you do with all this. Because how can we believe in God? Then we're going to look a little bit about science and faith and how those are designed to go hand in hand. But over time, there's been kind of a little bit of a gap, a chasm between those. So you almost have to choose one or the other, and it's difficult to choose one or the other. And then I think one of the things that we all deal with is, you know, if God is such a benevolent God, such a loving God, why is there distress on this planet? And why does God allow, condone, even encourage types of suffering? And why is it that is a part of our life perspective? So we're going to be looking at some of these. The way that people will view life comes through their own perspective. Now let me kind of just establish that a little bit. You as a unique individual were created by God in such a unique way that there has never in the history of humanity been a human who has perceived life the way you do. Now there's 8 billion on the planet right now. I don't know how many billions and billions and billions and billions there have been in the history of humanity. But if you just stop and think about it, the mind that you have, no one has ever existed that sees and perceives and processes things the way you do. No one ever will. It's that fearfully and wonderfully made component. You're that unique. But with that comes this lens through which you perceive the reality of life. We know that when you're in a courtroom, and you have the defendant and you have the prosecutors and prosecutions that's doing that, you have the defense team. They each have their lens of what they believe to be the truth, and they try to convey that in this court of law. One of the things that's interesting is you want to make sure that you have an unbiased judge and hopefully an unbiased jury to be able to give consideration to that. But what if you have a judge who is already predetermined, or if you already have a jury that has already made up their mind? Then no matter what you say, it's already been a predetermined outcome. Now that's one of the things that's interesting about some of the individuals that we're going to be looking at here. There's already been a predetermined outcome that they have come to a conclusion, and they have stunted their growth. They have not continued to explore whether or not what they believe today is what they need to continue to believe tomorrow or next week or next year. They've gotten to this point and they said, this is what I believe and that's the end of it, without really maturing or evolving. Even the Apostle Paul, who could do wonderful things and have this wonderful relationship with God and everything, he says, I haven't even gotten there. I keep pressing on to the goal. I forget what lies behind, and I keep looking for how I can continue to mature and evolve in who I am as a human and who I am in my relationship and the understanding with God. In Romans 12, Paul talks about that being a transformation. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's many people who choose not to renew their mind, so transformation does not occur. You see where I'm going with that? Okay, they're stuck. Now, these are people who have already decided the outcome of what they're doing. And they do it for a couple of different reasons. When you look at these lenses, atheism, they get to this idea, says, who is in charge? So they have a big problem with authority. I think I need to be the one that's in charge. And their decision making goes up to what they believe, and that does not go beyond what others may believe. And one of the others is not just society, but one of the others may be the input that they would receive from God. Okay? So, atheists generally have a problem with authority. Who's in control? Who's in charge? I want to be the ultimate, I want to be the end of all the arguments because my thinking should carry the weight. When you have this scientism, which is a science-only worldview, scientists need to say, if you can quantify it, if you can give me a fact by it, I don't want to deal with this faith stuff because that's too fluffy and ethereal. But I want to have facts. Now, what's really interesting in the idea of scientism, they said, I can only trust what I can measure. I want to quantify. What's really interesting is I am a researcher in the social sciences at the university. And there's 3 different types of research that you can do in social science research. There's quantitative research, which is fact, cause and effect. If you do this, if you flip this switch, does this happen? And you want to look for correlations between that. And you deal with statistics and facts and numbers and things like that. That's quantitative. But there's also research that is called qualitative. And qualitative research sits down with a person and said, you experienced something through the lens of your life. Explain to me why you see that the way you do, and I will write that up, and I will publish that and see if there are others who also share a similar perspective. Now, qualitative research is a more recent research methodology. It used to be quantitative, quantitative, quantitative. Test tubes and injections and try this and see if this works. If it does, great. If it doesn't, try it again. So it's all quantitative based. Qualitative has come into its being by saying, what if we explored people's lenses through which they view things? Does not that carry validity? Note that it doesn't say that it's right or wrong. It just says, does this person's point of view resonate with that person? Yes, it does. Okay, thank you for sharing. We're not moving into the judgment aspect, whether or not we agree with that or not. Keep that in mind when we are dealing with other people on the planet. It's not our job to be judgmental of other people's views. That's God's job. Our job is to accept the validity that they have the right to have that perspective. And just because we agree with the person's right to have the perspective does not mean that we endorse that perspective, agree with that perspective, or even believe it. But you see the difference? You're accepting the person. You're not necessarily accepting the belief that they're espousing. But this lens of science basically says, if I can't prove it, then it doesn't really carry weight for me. And that's what science, they look for meaning. And the third, the suffering, is God good? What they're looking basically is, can life be trustworthy? Can it be trusted? If I go out into life, is it gonna hurt me? Is it gonna harm me in some way? Is it gonna somehow build me up, or is it gonna tear me down? And so fear can sometimes cause us to doubt even the goodness of God with all that. So the disagreement, when we talk about atheism and scientism and problem of evil with suffering and things along this line, the disagreement is not about the facts. It's about the lens through which people view things. Now, one of the things that's and we're going to get to, well, how can we kind of address that? We'll get to that a little bit later as we go through this. But let's kind of break these down a little bit as we go through. Atheism. Atheists basically say, that there's no evidence for God. Prove to me there's God. Okay, and we're not going to do the watch and the watchmaker thing. You've heard that one, right? If you come across a watch, that has to be a watchmaker, and does the watch just come together all by itself? If you threw all the parts in the air and they came down together at a watch and it started working, wow. We're not going to do that. Wait, I just did that, didn't I? Okay, well then we're not going to do it again. But the idea is that if you hold up a book and you say, I don't believe there's any evidence for authors, There's no such thing as authors, but then you're holding a book and you can see the flaw in that, right? Because the book is what? Evidence that somebody wrote that and somebody put that together. So there's evidence for all that. So as we're looking at these questions, why does anything exist? Why does reason work? And why does morality matter? We're going to break those a little bit down. Why does anything exist? Now that's that cosmological argument. And we're dealing with this idea about where did we come from? How did we come from? And the bottom line of where everything exists goes back to what? Two words, they both start with the letter B. Big Bang. The Big Bang, right? The Big Bang Theory basically says that there was a point in time when there was no time, there was no space, there was no anything. It was just nothing. And then all of a sudden there was this, maybe not an explosion, but a revealing, an unveiling that created a radiating out. Now, do you know how old the universe is according to scientists who believe in the Big Bang approach? Okay? 14-something billion years. Now, how can they come up with a time about it, the universe being 14 billion years? But have the expanding universe. That's right. See, we've gotten really good at putting telescopes, the Hubble and everything in, where we can see galaxies far away, and we can take snapshots of where it is today, take a snapshot of the same thing a year from now and go, things have moved. Take a snapshot. We can see the way that the universe is moving, and we can track that. And they've got all their little math, their TI-85 calculators that they're putting together and all that. And they come up with this idea that says the universe is expanding at a certain rate, because that can be clocked, because in space it's a vacuum, so the rate is going to be a steady rate of expanding. So if something is expanding, what can you do if you're really clever? You can backtrack and say, if it's expanding this way and this way and this way, why don't we vector that baby and let's come all the way back to where there was a point in time and a time in time when something started this whole thing running. And scientists do that. They really like that. In fact, there's something that's called Planck time. Planck, P-L-A-N-K. He was a scientist, and he came up with the Planck constant, but he also has Planck time that says 10 to the minus 43rd degree seconds after the Big Bang is when everything started working. Everything was activated, right? Time started, space started, because Einstein says, you can't have time without space things, and you can't have space things without time things. So that's where the space-time continuum comes from. Scientists have come up that says as this Big Bang occurred, there were 4 different powers that were released. There was gravity power, there was electromagnetic power, and there was what's called strong and weak power. Strong power is what holds a nucleus, the core of a nucleus together. That's strong. The weak forces are the ones that keep all the different electrons circling around that. So they said at some point we can track nuclei and electrons, and we can see gravity, right? We can do this, and gravity, it's worked. Electromagnetism, you've done that. This is staying on because there's a magnet there. So these 4 great forces are part of the quantum physics approach of saying all of these things came into being all at once. Now, what they don't get to is where did that start from? And an example that is given is if you have a balloon that's floating in midair, it's got some helium in it and it's floating right there, you may be thinking, okay, well, how did that get there? Is there a string? Is there, some kind of a person? Is there a fan that's blowing? How did that get there? And we know that effects have cause. We're going to look for something because the balloon just did not appear there. Something put it there. It had to be put there in some way, shape, or form. So what the scientists have not been able to come up with, the cosmologists in existence, they are very good at trying to explain how something might work. But scientists are terrible at saying why. They don't know why. And the big why is, well, what prompted the Big Bang? And that's a very reasonable question, but nobody has an answer to what prompted this Big Bang with all this. When we're talking about the moral argument, one of the most interesting books, and Johnathan has referred to this in class, is the author C.S. Lewis. He wrote this book called Mere Christianity. If you haven't read that in a while, it's a good read. One of the things that he mentions in here is that, let me see if I can see that exact quote. How do you know a line is crooked? You have to have a straight line to compare the crookedness of it. So if you have a straight line, then you can discern that there is now something that is a not straight line. But there's got to be that standard, right? So in morality, evil and bad have to address that there is a standard called good. Are you tracking with me on this? Because if there is not a standard called good, then there would never be a bad. Because bad correlates with the good. You see where that's going? Because many people are now deciding that the standard for good is no longer a universal standard. It's an individual standard. If I declare it to be good, you have no right to tell me that it's bad. And if you tell me it's bad, then you are bad for telling me that I am not good. Now, if you've been watching the way society has been moving the past 50, 60, 70, 80 years, you see that that has become a more common theme. That the standard for what is good has shifted from something that is universal to something that is now personally subjective, that I get to decide what that is. So, the moment that you say that one set of moral ideas can be better than another, you are measuring them by what? A standard. Now, one of the things that we as Christians, we look at, it says we have standards. We have a cosmological answer to the cosmological argument. Now, what about reason? Design and something. Let me talk about a computer just for a second, because Johnathan really likes computers, and I'm using some of his notes. If your computer randomly generated text due to a glitch, it just kind of went, nee, 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 nee. I'm just going to kind of fritz that, which you think sometimes happens, right? Like, this computer has a mind of its own. No, it's probably user error. And no, the computer just started doing this all by itself. Well, it could be a stuck key. There's still something going on there, right? But you wouldn't trust the output if a computer randomly generated text due to a glitch. But the computer was originally, you have a computer because somebody designed the computer. You're just the user of that. Design gives confidence, and better design produces better confidence, whereas randomness of that does not necessarily produce confidence in all that. So when we look at these scriptures like argument for reasons, many atheists trust reason, because reason, one of the things about reason is that reason is not necessarily based on fact for many atheists that are trying to believe that reason. Most reason that they will come to is based on emotions, not fact. A person who has been betrayed by a friend may struggle with new relationships. You watch a lot of TV shows, you deal with somebody who has been burned in a relationship, and you would hear them say, I'm never going to trust this type of a person again. I'm never going to do this. I've been hurt by that. I've been wounded by that. And guess what has happened to their lens through which they view life? The lens has shifted just a little notch. Because before, there was that trust. But because there was a betrayal of trust, it changes the way in which they will make decisions from this point forward. Do you see that that is an emotionally based reason? Because you as their friend might say, you know, that's not necessarily true. Just because you got hurt by this person does not mean you're going to be hurt by every person. See, you're trying to advise them to think a little bit bigger and a little bit more outside. But if they become really resolved in that, then they may go through the rest of their life with a new belief system that is based purely on an emotional reaction to life. And when we talk about, for example, atheists, many atheists, for example, have been wounded. They've been hurt either by super zealous religious parents or family systems, and they're swinging and doing a knee-jerk reaction. That's kind of what my professor friend that I described earlier, who is a great Bible scholar, and I respect very much the way in which he writes about the structure of Scripture and the way in which arguments can be derived from Scripture. But he's no longer doing that from a person of faith. He's doing that from a science perspective that says, I can still quantify aspects of Scripture that make sense. That doesn't necessarily move into me having a faith perspective of that. So I respect his knowledge, but his woundedness shifted the way he viewed, because he was brought up in an authoritarian religious perspective and took that knee-jerk reaction to that. So many atheists have this perspective that they reject Christ, they reject Christian arguments from a rational perspective, from reasonable perspective, because they're afraid of answering these types of questions. What if you accepted that there was something before the Big Bang? I don't have any problem with the Big Bang. Okay? I don't have any problem with the Big Bang theory. To me, that's Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God, Big Bang things. Okay. How did he do it? I don't know. I don't care. That's irrelevant, because all of that's going to be theoretical. But all we can see, even scientists will agree that time and space did not begin until the Big Bang. And what do we know about God? He's not limited to time, and he is not limited to space. But if he decided to create time and space, and those four major forces, electromagnetism, gravity, strong forces, weak forces, if that was all part of the way he decided to do it, isn't that cool? But it's not up for me to do that. But so the idea is that atheists struggle to explain the questions of why anything exists, why reason works, and why morality matters. Why it matters. So let's dig down a little bit more into this science component. Science is is kind of like a mechanic. You take your car into the mechanic, and the mechanic will say, okay, this is what's wrong, it needs to be fixed. This is what's wrong, it needs to be fixed. But it doesn't tell you who designed the car, why the car was designed this way. He doesn't get into that aspect of it. He's just looking for answers that will make sense to make it work. He does not back up. So science really focuses on describing behaviors and answering the question of how. How does this work? How do you have this cause and effect? That's what science does. It never gets to the why. Why would it be that way? Science does not do that. Look at these verses. Proverbs 25:2. God delights in discovery. John 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. These type of dynamics, and the Word was with God in the beginning. All of these kind of dynamics offer explanations. The Christian perspective, the scriptural perspective, offers the rationale for the why, not necessarily just the how. And scientists look at how. They study how the universe operates. Christianity explains why things exist at all. Acts chapter 17, Paul says, in him we live and move and have our being. Hebrews 1, Christ sustains all things, and Christ is the creator. He was with God in the beginning. And it's really interesting that some of the original scientists, the historical scientists, Newton, Kepler, Pascal, all of these really smart people that were developing the scientific theories and the quantifications, what was one thing that they all had in common about faith? They were all Christians. They were all believers. They all had as their core perspective that there is a God in control of the universe. And then they sought about trying to describe how God made things. That's where Newton and the gravity things. Newton didn't just say gravity just did there. He says this is something that God established so that humans, the way the world is spinning, do not fling off into space. It holds us grounded, and that the gravitational pull that we have on our planet, the size of the planet, the density of the planet, the spin of the planet, that it correlates amazingly with human life and life in general. That it's not so fast that we float, and so light, but it's not so harsh of gravity that we squash. Okay? I mean, it fits for existence. And that's what he marveled at. He described the way God set things in motion. But all of these historical scientists, they all had a strong faith in the foundation that creation and everything that we have comes from a creator. It's only as people started moving from what's called the modern era into the postmodern era, where the postmodern era opened up ideas by saying, well, I don't really believe that. I want to believe this. And there are people that said, yeah, me too. Understand at some level, the whole thought of postmodernism has shifted people's perspectives from having a central core of morality and ethics and purpose in life to individual. In other words, what you believe is your belief, and it's not my job to tell you you're wrong. If that's what you choose to believe, okay. That's a postmodern mindset. And when that has infiltrated the sciences, then it becomes more difficult for even science to have things that are quantifiable and grounded, because it's too subjective. Well, I don't believe that. Okay, well, I guess if you don't believe it, it must be true. No, beliefs can be flawed, because beliefs always have to go back to the core of what's the foundation of your belief system. And postmodernism teaches and encourages that the core foundation of a belief system is the individual. That's humanism. What I believe, you can't tell me I'm wrong. And if you tell me I'm wrong, then you are bad and evil, because I am the standard. And it shifted this. But just keep in mind, scientists didn't really start that way. Everybody started out with all of this as understanding that there was a creator. Two people may disagree about how a house was built. Was it brick by brick or prefab? I had a good friend, went to church with him years ago, David Bloxam. David Bloxam has this business called Speed Fabcrete. And Speed Fabcrete was they would create little panels for buildings and houses and constructions, and they would build them, and they would carry them in, and they would just raise these sections and put them in, and then they would hold them together, and there you have this house. Great way to do construction. Some people say, wow, brick, 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 brick. Some people say wood, 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 wood. Whatever it is. People may disagree how a wall or a house might be built, but everybody agrees somebody had to start that ball rolling. There had to be a builder. There had to be a designer. So we can explain how it was built, but then we are tasked, because I do believe this is a gift of God. Do keep this in mind. The only part of creation that can ponder existence, self-existence, are humans. Birds don't. Squirrels definitely don't. Don't get me on squirrels. But there's no other creature that ponders its existence. I mean, what drives humans, isn't this cool? What drives humans to even ponder the existence of the universe by exploring things like a Big Bang Theory? Okay, I know y'all have given a lot of thought to that. You've stayed up late at night pondering all of these deeper thoughts. But do keep in mind, isn't the ability for us to even contemplate these things unique to humanity, unique to the way we are, that if we truly believe in evolution, can we be so arrogant as to assume that the only thing that existed through that evolutionary process, thank you, Darwin, with all of this, that, coming up through the amoebas and the primordial and all that kind of stuff, and then all of a sudden, here comes humans that can ponder all this stuff, that the only entity, the only sentient being on the planet that can think this way are humans. Isn't there an arrogance in that? Or is there a design in that? Now, the big idea about faith and science is that they are designed to go together. They're designed to go together. Because it's okay for us to say, wow, I know the why. In the beginning, God created. And then for us to go, where did he get the idea for a platypus? And what's with asparagus? We get to think these types of things. And that's going to drive us toward the how did he do that, not the why. But the only creature that exists on the planet, that has ever existed on the planet, is not by happenstance, that gets to ponder existence, is humanity. Now, one of the things that really goes with that is, then what happens when we ponder things that don't go the way that we would like for them to go? Ellen and I went to a funeral of an old friend yesterday, and his wife got up, and one of her first things that she says is, "This is a tragedy, but we will get through this." To consider that even loss in life has a tragedy component to it, I think we can all agree with that. Because the whole idea about loss and suffering, and I'm going to tread lightly with this one, because I know this is something that's part of our nature that God, I think, wants us to try to address. Suffering in some way and feeling that sense of loss, at its core, listen to me all the way through this, at its core is a sign of being selfish. Now, I'm not saying that in a harsh way. I'm saying that in a way because if we lose something that we don't want to lose, I want to hang on to that. I don't want to let go of that. I want you to go back to when your kids were like 4 and 5 and you're recycling toys in their room that they haven't played with in 4 or 5 years. And you say, well, let's give this away. No, that's mine. And they grab it. Or little Johnny or little Susie comes over and they want to play. Let's share your toys. No, that's mine. See, we have built in with us this perspective that once we have acquired something, we want to hang on to it. Even though we don't value it, use it, it's going to be on the shelf. I am not going to ask how many of you have things in your garage or in your attic or whatever it is that probably just don't need to be there anymore, right? I'm not going to go there because I see all the elbows and the smiles and the looks to each other like that. There's something about that we want to retain things because we don't want to let go of something that we at some point found value in, and we treasure that, right? So when we extrapolate that to, well, someone passes away, it's not uncommon that we can go through a little bit of this grieving process, which for some people could even deteriorate into a type of a pouting tantrum. And who do kids get mad at first when things don't go their way? Mom and dad. You're the worst mom and dad ever. I hate you. I'm going to go live with Susie's mom and dad because they're nice. They're cool. And we go, okay, I'll pack your bag. You know, the old leave it to beaver thing. Well, beef, okay, well, I'll pack your bag for you. What, you're kicking me? No, this is what you wanted. You know, life lesson number next, right? All that kind of stuff. But the idea is that we get mad at mom and dad when things don't go the way we want and they are making us inconvenienced, right? What do adults do when things are taken away from them? Who's one of the first people that they blame? God, the Father. Even to the point that they said, you know what? I'm never going to have anything to do with you again. I'm going to move out of this house and I'm going to go over there. Now that's where a lot of the woundedness that comes with atheists. They've been hurt because they have lost things that they felt entitled to hang on to. And because it's gone away, they blame the cosmic God. Well, God is such a good, loving God. Why doesn't he give me what I want? Well, because that's not what a good parent does. A good parent is not just the cosmic butler any more than your mom and dad says, okay, well, I don't want to do this. Okay, what do you want? Well, no. Parents sometimes have to say no. Jesus in the garden. Okay? Give me a little bit of liberty with this, okay? Jesus in the garden. I don't want to do this. God says, no, you need to do this. Number 2, I told you I didn't want to do this. God says, no, this is the way it's going to be. I told you, you're not listening. I don't want to do this. And God said, no. And because Jesus is who Jesus is, and he had ultimate trust in the why of life, he deferred his physical distress to something bigger than just his want and his need. I'm going to tell you, a lot of people don't get to that point. They get stuck in the pouting and the tantruming and the I don't like this and it's not going to be good. Mrs. Haversham, what book was that? Great Expectations. You remember Mrs. Haversham in the beginning? Miss Haversham, because she was jilted at the altar. I don't know if you remember the story. She was an old lady and it had the spooky house. Everything deteriorated because when she was younger, she was jilted at the altar. When they went into the house, the table was still spread with all the decayed food and cake and all that. It's cobwebbed and mouse-eaten and all that stuff. She's still wearing the wedding dress. She gets stuck in that cycle of not accommodating that things that you want to hang on to are oftentimes going to go away. Now, God allows us, this is really interesting, if you look at this, God allows freedom. A parent who allows a child to learn to walk knows the child will fall. It will not do the child any good if the parent prevents the child from suffering. It's important that we understand suffering is essential for growth. It's not as simple as the no pain, no gain kind of a deal. But if we don't suffer, then we will never struggle with deeper meanings of understanding that mom and dad aren't that bad. Maybe even understanding God can be faithful. So suffering is essential. Being stuck in suffering is not really good. God does not delight in suffering. He says that in Lamentations. But God causes all things, even the suffering, to work for good, right? Romans 8. Joseph, the story of Joseph, one of Ellen's favorite stories. Joseph had every right to grow up being a really terrible kid. His older brothers literally tried to kill him. Didn't just put him down for being the dreamer, didn't just yell at him, just didn't mock him, didn't hammer his self-esteem. Somehow all the way through that, Joseph maintained a resiliency with all that. Then that resiliency was seen all the way through life because something happened in his life at an early age, I think through Dad, that was basically infusing with him a sense that there is something bigger. In fact, that's what he says to his brothers later on. The reason I did this and went this very circuitous route to get where I am, the reason is because God prepared me for this moment so that when you had a need, I would be here to provide that. Isn't that cool? And one of the things that people who get stuck in the existence of God, they don't see the developmental, they don't see the lifelong perspective. Looking back and realizing that things could have gone different, but how well they did end up is something we get to ponder. Now, one of the neat things that God gives us is this idea of choosing. That's free will. We can never stop things from coming at us in life. We can't stop things from happening, but we are always in charge of how we choose to respond. Always. 1 Peter 2, and I'm going to close in this. 1 Peter 2 talks about if you suffer and you're hurting and you're agonizing, be at peace because you are sharing even in the suffering of Christ, who suffered for the greater glory. The suffering here is transient. It will pass. It will dissipate. Many people lose loved ones. That's a funny phrase. I lost them. I said, well, go find them. No, it's more like this person in my life passed away. They're no longer here. And I don't like them not being here. So I'm going to pout and I'm going to blame God for being an unfair God. God grieves too. God does not celebrate suffering. God hopes that we will choose the path to view as suffering as being essential for maturity. If we don't suffer, we will never evolve and mature. And the way in which we suffer is we suffer as Christ did. Jesus himself said, in this world you will suffer. You'll have tribulations. But be of good cheer. Think bigger. Go past through the suffering on this. In our suffering, God does not bubble wrap us and keep us from hurting. The great theme I want you to take away with here, and we'll end with this. The great way that we can do this is remember the 23rd Psalm. Even though I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, which is suffering, walking through the valley of the shadow of death is not fun. Even if I'm having to suffer, I will fear no evil. Why? Because you're with me. The best way to move through suffering is not trying to fix that person, but to be in a relationship with that person that provides support and companionship. Because I've still got to be the one to walk through that valley of the shadow of death. But I'll fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Your presence provides me comfort during my suffering, even though I've got to go through it. So when it comes time to working with people that are suffering, Don't try to say, oh, well, it's God's will or all these. Don't do that. Just be with them. Listen to them. Partner with them in the process. Share with them in the sufferings, because you know what it's like to hurt. You know what it's like to not have something here that you would just love to continue to have, but it's no longer there, which is why maybe God gave us this marvelous gift called memory. Because we can do as Mary did. We can treasure in our hearts. That's why we surround ourselves with pictures and with baubles and with memorabilia, because those things take us back and we treasure that event and that relationship. At the funeral yesterday, as they do at many funerals, they have the slideshow of all the different pictures of all the different times and seasons of that person's life. Treasures. Is it treasures to say, wow, we'll never have that anymore? Or is it treasures to say, wasn't it amazing that I was able to partner with that in those events and to have a bit of blessing? And praise be to God for giving me the opportunity to be blessed by that person, to have my life blessed by that person. So next week, there's a couple more slides here. Next week, Johnathan's hopefully will be back, and he's going to dig down a little bit more into the Christian morality. You can read Job 1 and 2 on suffering and the rightness and wrong things, and then again, tap back into Romans 8, as I've already kind of alluded to. So thank you all.